Awesome. I think we're live. Yeah,
Cool.
great. So, hey everyone. I'm going to go ahead and continue to mute some of you that are just joining us for right now, just so we don't have all that background noise. But welcome to another CKAMA event. We have a really special guest tonight, and today's guest has a track record for exceeding all expectations and proving himself an invaluable asset to any team he works with. Having taught himself how to code as a kid, completing a multiple month-long intern project in a single week, capitalizing on an opportunity to connect with one of Facebook's founders, and rising through the ranks at one of the most recognized work management platforms in the world. He is an example of consistently taking initiative, creating opportunities, and leaving the people around him in awe. Everyone, please go ahead and unmute yourselves. Turn your cameras on and help me in welcoming Asana's adoption tech lead, Phips Peter. Welcome, Phips.
Hi, welcome.
For
Thank
joining
you. That
us.
was
Phips.
Thanks. That was a very kind introduction.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's you have a lot of like super valuable things within your experiences, and so it's really exciting for the community right now and thank you again for coming to join us.
Sure.
But your experiences and the things that you've been able to accomplish are going to be super helpful for a lot of the people here that are just starting out.
Sounds great.
And so I wanted just like to kick things off and ask you, actually first, is there anything else that I'm missing that you would like to share with our audience before we even begin?
Not that I know of. I think I don't know the audience well enough, but I'm excited to learn more and hear from all of you.
Great. So one thing that's actually super interesting about your background, right, is that you actually have been working at Asana for a number of years now.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you first joined versus where you are now, there are obviously things that kind of change in your day-to-day job, as well as like the responsibilities that you kind of have to oversee and just how the company itself like works. Can you walk us through a little bit of what that looked like and kind of the adaptations that you had to make throughout your career thus far?
Sure. So I think that there's sort of two aspects to this. So there's one, the company size aspect, and I think this is pretty common advice or commonly discussed, is that there's a trade-off between small companies and big companies. And the small companies you get more responsibility and less of a safety net. And a bigger company, there's sort of tends to be like a much narrower autonomy. So like you're working on a much more smaller problem, but it has bigger impact and there's more of a safety net behind you. And so that's been I think a pretty telling story of Asana as it's grown. I joined Asana in late 2013 with about 50 people. It's now 2020 with a lot more people. And so a lot of the aspects of like what individuals are responsible for has become narrower, more impactful. So like, you might be in charge of like a big swath of the marketing team when you're a 50-person startup, but you're only marketing to a tiny number of customers versus now people are very specialized marketing to very large numbers of customers, for example. So that's, I think, the company one, and that's a pretty standard small company, big company one. I think for me as an engineer, the thing that was most surprising as I've like gone in more senior is how much the day-to-day job has become less about writing code and much more about dealing with people's emotions and feelings about the code that exists. Which kind of going back to the thing is like all problems are human problems, and that's just certainly true. The one nice thing is being the engineer in the room is there's a very firm definition of reality, like the code does what it does. And so it's a lot easier I often not only have to represent what's capable and what's possible, not a lot of the uncertainties that other executives have to represent in different meetings.
Yeah, that's great. I think that I also wanted to just to give like a brief overview of that, I think is a great way to start. But I think another thing that left a pretty lasting impression on me when you first shared with me was that early on in your career, there was a manager that kind of took interest in seeing how you took like an intern project that should have taken you like a lot longer and you were able to kind of compress that within a much shorter period of time. And that kind of like opening the doors to, you know, potentially considering like Silicon Valley, and then moving out here for LinkedIn. Do you mind sharing like what kind of drove you to do things like that? And I assume that that kind of permeated throughout the rest of your career and kind of led to more opportunities of like growth and like kind of exceeding those expectations.
Sure. So I guess the story he's telling about, and I'll just like quickly recap, was I was a sophomore, and previously, before I had a real job, I was a sailing instructor. And so that was I lived on the beach as a beach bum and taught sailing. And then my parents were like, you should do something real. And that was disappointing. So I got an internship at the medical school, and the head of IT there wanted someone to basically clean up his 30 years of technical debt that he wrote in Perl scripts and try to just like fix it. And these Perl scripts, to give you a sense, just like went through the network and categorized all the devices on the network for a bunch of IT reasons. And he hired me and thought it was going to be a 2-week project, and ended up it was supposed to be a 2-month or 3-month project. It ended up being like a 2-week project. And a lot of what made that a lot easier was the fact that I had been familiar with coding beforehand, had some pretty opinionated takes, and was willing just to like, I just found it really interesting. And I think the main thing that's been helpful for my career is I find coding just like in a way of self-expression and art. And I don't really think about it as like a necessarily like work. Sometimes it is, like anything can be work, but it's actually one of the things like I actually enjoy doing it as art. And so that's been really, really helpful. And it makes it easier for me to kind of like, I feel like go above and beyond because it's something I find fun.
Yeah, I think that's a huge point to have. It's like when you enjoy doing something, like you kind of actively, you know, seek to do a little bit more just because it's not like work for you. It's like, no, if I can, you know, add a little bit on top of that, for sure that helps. So for the people that are on this call tonight, I want to go ahead and open this up to any questions you all might have. Phips is a super valuable resource here. I mean, you're talking to a tech lead at like a high growth startup. So for sure, take advantage of this time and ask any questions that you might have. Go ahead and unmute yourselves. I know some of you do like asking questions in the chat, so we'll keep an eye out on that as well. But if you could also turn your cameras on so that Phips can assign a name to a face, that'd be really awesome. So yeah, the floor is yours. Mia, did you want to add a question? I know you always have a good question.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and go first. Break the ice for everybody else. Hey Phips, my name is Mia. I am a disabled mom of 4 who is in school at Kenzie Academy right now for UX engineering, which is
Nice.
UX design mixed with a little bit of front end code, because I too think that coding is an art form. And with design and kind of bridging the gap between designers and developers, knowing a little bit about what the challenges developers face in trying to build these things that designers build helps bridge that gap and keep us as designers within the realm of something that can be done in a good time frame, and keeps the developers in the realm of something they can see and something that's tangible. So huge passion of mine. I'm a big accessibility advocate, and I think the way through to a more accessible future for people is through tech, which is why I'm focusing on UX design, because that's where all the accessibility features come into play. So my question for you, and I skimmed over your LinkedIn profile and was listening to what you were saying, and I'm already taking notes like a crazy woman. But what is one thing that you did that got you into breaking into tech and that you would do again, and why?
So the way I got into tech was like pretty accidental. Like it definitely was like a series of odd events. The way I interviewed for LinkedIn was actually I was dating someone in California, and my parents wouldn't let me go visit them. And so if I applied for this job, like I could do it. But I think the thing in hindsight that's been really helpful is this is a good question. Breaking into tech in what way, I guess, is the question. Like, can I push back a little bit just to make sure I get a little bit more clarity and answer? Because I think there's a lot of ways that could mean. Is this about getting like a first job? Is this about learning a specific skill? Like, what do you imagine here?
It's an overall question, because breaking into tech for everybody is going to be something that they do in a different way. But if there was one piece of wisdom that you learned, like one thing that you did that just impacted you in such a way that kind of made this career easier to go after, or it drove up your motivation, that one thing, because we all have that pivot point. So what was your pivot point in tech that kept you going, that really got you to where you are? And the one thing that you would always do again, and why is that the thing?
Yeah, so I don't know if it's like the one thing that I like consciously realized, but I think it's something that I've like realized in hindsight, and is at least software engineering is much more like a craft in the traditional sense than a lot of things. And so what I mean by that is like, I kind of imagine it like sort of like the 1700s things, like where you become like a blacksmith or a silversmith or something. And like you would start, there's just like this long time to expertise and mastery. And I taught myself how to code as a kid. I've been a professional software engineer for almost a decade, and I'm still learning things, a lot of like new stuff. And it's been interesting watching like the levels of mastery that like I myself went through. I see people who are interns or new grads going through, and where I look at people who have been, when I get the rare occasion to talk to people who have been like programming since the 1970s and how they view it, it gives me the sense that there's like, you're never done. Like it's, you have to keep your mind open to the fact that you're always going to be learning, and like, that's really important. So I like have a couple of stages where I think like engineers move through, and I'm sure there are stages beyond where I am too.
That's a really well thought out answer. One of the best answers I've gotten to that particular question. So I thank you for your time, and I thank you for your answer.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a really tough question. So thanks. Anyone else?
Yeah, everyone ask those nice, like juicy questions where you got to get them thinking, because those are actually low key some of the like more profound things that, hold on one second. We need to, okay, cool. Yeah, does anyone else have a question like for the moment? I can go ahead and actually ask another one that I think would be helpful for people.
It seems like some people are raising their hands.
I do have a question for you, Phips.
Sure.
Joshua Honore, my background kind of lies in marketing, but I'm wanting to get into the coding industry because they're next door neighbors to each other. But I used to work at a company that used Asana in its early stages, as in when it just came out. And so I was interested in hearing from you, since you were hands-on, kind of like, let's make this happen. How much has Asana changed from its first iteration to what it is today?
Oh, a ton. I mean, is there a specific metric you want to hear about, like a specific lens that you want to hear about how it's changed? Or like, in your
opinion, is it light years better now than it was at the beginning? Has it evolved, or how is that process seeing, your not infant, but your starting like project, that your baby turning into a full-fledged monster kind of thing?
Yeah, I think there are two really key turning points for Asana, two really big ones. When Asana started out, we had this vision of being like, sort of like the thing that everyone would use almost as a social network that like companies would just like happen to pay for, which is actually kind of absurd in hindsight. Like, what social network relies on tasks? Like, we have an official Burning Man integration now. Like, you can go to burner.asana.com or something, or Burnasana. I forgot what the name it is, but like, it was like, it would set up your Burning Man tent and help you find Burning Man friends. And around 20, like somewhere around half my time in tenure, like, we're like, what if we were actually like going to be like a serious business and start focusing on like big enterprise customers? And I think that was like a pretty big fundamental shift. And like a lot of things are a lot clearer there. Like, it makes a lot more sense to sell an enterprise product to enterprises than sort of this social network thing that we were doing beforehand. And I think we always had a plan of selling to businesses, but I think it became much more explicitly focused to be like focus on companies and like knowledge workers as opposed to just like general people. That focus really helped, as I would say, the takeaway. And the other one is we re-architected. So that was one of the things I worked on. And so we had this in-house framework called Luna 1. which is very similar to Meteor, if some people are familiar with that. And then we basically built an in-house architecture, and that's been really, really cool. So it's sort of like a real-time version of GraphQL, sort of like if Firebase and GraphQL had a merged. I don't know if these are relevant terms, but I'm trying to come up with as many
all of it.
trying to come up with as many things from open source land that I can reference. And we've had that since about 2014 to 2016. Sorry, we started building that in 2014 and went into production in 2016. And it's a pretty cool piece of infrastructure because it lets us build some really powerful features and have things correct by default. So I think one of the engineering principles I would say here, or that I think I'm really proud of with Asana, is that we tend to try to solve problems holistically. So I don't think that we don't have problems or make mistakes. I'm pretty much convinced that no matter how hard you try, humans are at best going to get a 50% right. But I like that we try not to make the same mistakes again.
At least you don't have to go back into the core code and, try to figure out where you made the mistake every time there's something wrong, kind of thing.
No, it's more like, there's this poem that we read in college called The Bridge Builder, and it's not a particularly great poem, but the concept of the poem was basically this old guy is building a bridge, and this young guy walks by and is like, why are you building a bridge over this raging river? He was like, I can know how to get over across the river, but you might not know how to, so I want to build a bridge so you don't have to try to get across the river. And I think it's solving when people have expertise and making it so people can't fall into the same hole again is really a key here. So Facebook's developer experience team calls it falling into the pit of success, which is you want developers by default to do the right thing. And I think having the time to actually make it sure that our engineers don't repeat the same mistakes means we can have a lot higher engineering velocity. We still make new mistakes, but at least we're not making the same mistakes again.
Gotcha.
So we have a couple of questions here in the chat.
Sure.
I'm seeing, so Maurice asks, so he has no experience coding and he's trying to decide between software engineering and data science. So his background is that he has a business degree and he's curious about combining business and coding. How do you decide what's for you?
Cool. Yeah. I think the way you decide is, I definitely think it's really hard to learn how to code if you don't want what you're building. I a number of times people ask me how do I get a kid, or how do I learn how to code, or I have a lot of younger siblings, so their friends' parents ask me how do I teach my kid how to code? And if you don't want what you're building at the end of code, you're probably not going to finish that project. So it has to be something that you're at least intellectually curious enough about to see the end result. And so if you find yourself try making a project that could test both of them. I mean, this is dark and I apologize, but I think there's a lot of people right now coming up with what projects can you do with the coronavirus? Could you visualize it in some way? Can you analyze the data? You could try to do something along those lines if that's something that interests you, and see where you naturally fall. Are you having more fun going into cleaning the data, understanding why it's that way? Or are you having more fun playing around with the pixels and seeing how it's working there, and the user experiences that you're building? And that, notice where you're naturally spending your time and on a project that you want to see done.
No, I think that's great. That's actually speaking to the fundamental point of having that clarity. And the only way that you can really get to that clarity, Maurice, is by trying things out and seeing what resonates with you and then going down that path a little bit further. And I think that a lot of people kind of, they hesitate, or, they're, indecisive to the point where, what if I make the wrong decision? And the only way to really know if you made.
You cut out.
Yeah.
Phips?
Yeah.
Hi, this is Lilia from
I think I cut off.
Sacramento. Oh, go ahead, Melvin.
Sorry, no, I think I cut off right there. I have a rogue pair of headphones that keep turning on by themselves. But yeah, go ahead, Lilia. Sorry.
Phips, this is Lilia, and my background is in customer service and administration. This is, I'm looking at this as a career change. Web development had been coming to me off and on for the last decade, but I kept pushing it off. I was like, this is not for me. But every other area that I was trying to look into, I didn't really fit. And then this year, for some reason, I was looking at how to get better at what I already do, which is tech support. And it mentioned that tech support was the gateway to a lot of different IT careers, web development being one of them. So that's what made me relook into it. I decided on web development before I found Career Karma, because when I looked at everything, I felt like it fit my personality. But now going through the prep courses, I feel a little challenged. Have you ever experienced that? And, like, how did you get through it? One of the reasons why I thought it would be good for me is because, like, I'm very detailed oriented. I'm disciplined. In tech support, that's what we do, is problem solving, analysis, and problem solving. So I was just trying to build on what I already have, and web development seemed like the good next step. But then as I go through the prep course, I feel at some points I'm really getting it. Other points I feel challenged, and then it's making me second guess myself.
Totally. So let me just, the question is, have I ever felt challenged, and do I get over it? Is that the question?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Cool. What was the last hobby you tried to learn, out of curiosity, if you're willing to share?
Ooh, I don't think any really in a long time.
Do you remember trying to learn how to ride a bike or something like that? And you know how it goes from like a conscious effort that you're trying to hello? I think you're muted too.
Hey, Lilia, do you want to, I
It's
think
me.
that you might be muted. Okay, there we go.
Okay, all right.
So like, I think it's one of these things that goes from like something that you're actively thinking about, like when you're trying to learn how to ride a bike and you're like thinking about how the pedals move and everything else, to something that like you abstract away, and you can like, you stop viewing it as like something you're actively doing as a tool to get you somewhere. And so I think that's true of anyone learning any new technology. And so I view coding as sort of a stage, as I was talking about earlier, of craftsmanship. So I think the first one is what I call coding by magic, where like you see commands and you type them into your terminal or whatever, and they're like basically spells. Like, it produces a result sometimes, and like you get there, and that's fine. That's where everyone starts with any sort of technology. And then I think there's like coding by dogma, which is that you've now developed like a set of spells or languages or tools or frameworks that work for you, and you kind of go in there. And at some point you get past that, and it becomes like coding by abstraction. You start to realize that all the programming languages are basically the same. They just have different viewpoints on them. And even with new technology, I go through that. Like, I try to teach myself, last week trying to teach myself 11T, which is just a static site generator, but is really confusing. Managed to figure that out. Tailwind, which was totally different than how I ever wrote CSS before. And I was like, okay. Machine learning, I went to an ML talk this week by a coworker. I'm starting to get it, but like, yeah, you kind of go through, I think there's if you are excited about it and want to learn, having the faith that you'll get to the other side is really important. Because a lot of, I think it goes back to this craftsmanship like thing, like, or craftspersonship. Like, it's not, I don't think being a software engineer is a fundamentally unique skill. I think anyone could do it. It's just, are you going to put the time and effort to hone that craft? In the same way, like cooking or drawing or any other hobby, it's just like a lot of these things are like, how are you putting in the time?
I think that's what scared me, because it's not hard for me to grasp the concept, but when I was working through the prep course and I ran into a roadblock, I mean, I really couldn't get it. And I'm like, well, I'm willing to put the time and effort into learning this, but do I have the capacity to learn it? And that's how much it shook me. And I was like, basically it made me feel like, am I fooling myself for even trying to do this?
Yeah, I think that's a thing that comes up for a lot of people, is like this sort of like technical imposter syndrome. And like, it's very hard to overcome. But something that often reassures me is like the entire field of computer science is only like 70 years old. When you compare that to like all other sorts of like human endeavors, like we're talking thousands of years, and this is like, it's still pretty novel. And you can generally, the thing that I also find comforting is that everything in computer science often has a real world analogy. And if you can find the real world analogy, it can help you build a mental model, even if you know the mental model is bad. Like, have you heard like all abstractions are leaky, or like all models are wrong, but some are useful? If you can just get you something to give you that like hook over the ledge of that, that helps a lot.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
No problem.
I've got another.
I'll let you go, dude. You go first.
All right. Well, mine was gonna be quick. Just how many coding languages do you know at this current moment?
I mean, at this current moment, it's actually, I think, the right question, because the number, I forget them too. Yeah, so like it's, at the moment with familiarity, I would say my TypeScript is my like #1 go-to language, and I could probably passably get away with Go and Python if I need to script something. And then I have a couple languages that are like tertiary, like Java or Ruby or whatnot. But I've learned a ton of different languages over time. They actually are all way more similar than most people realize. And so switching between them is just takes a little bit of time adjustment, but usually I can get there.
As long as you got the concept behind it, basically.
Yeah, there's a great website called Learn X and Y, which gives like a couple, like a template of like all these different programming languages, and like gives a couple comments examples for them. That's pretty good, but yeah, they're kind of like human languages. Programming languages have families to them. Like there's a set of Pascal languages, a set of like Lisp languages, a set of ML languages. ML not being machine learning, ML being math language. And a lot of these just came from like the 1960s, and they've like, you can probably find a tree of programming languages. Mm-hmm. And all the programming languages in the last 10 years or so, like Go, Rust, or Swift, kind of just try to merge all the best ideas over the last 50 or 60 years. There's a lot less ideological diversity than people realize, especially for mainstream languages. You'll find a bunch of esoteric languages out there, but things that companies use are pretty similar. Joshua, you sound like you had a question earlier.
Oh, yes. Sorry, I'm wearing my sunglasses inside because bright lights right now. So
no
makes
worries.
it easy with anything. I was actually wanting to ask you more on, like, kind of go on the back of the code about the coding languages. I'm looking at multiple, but I'm kind of wanting to just level down so I can specialize in a certain field rather, because trying to learn a whole bunch, I know right now would be kind of crazy. And even you're going to end up probably using multiple as you go on in the career of doing this like you have.
Right.
But like mainly, if you had a recommendation, what would you recommend to anybody new to really learn outside like the basic JavaScript, HTML, CSS to get started? What would you recommend from there, from your personal experience?
Yeah, I think Python's always a safe one. Python seems, as far as I'm convinced, the second best language for anything. And most people know Python. A lot of universities are switching over to teaching coding that way. It's the language for data science. I personally dislike coding in Python quite a lot, but it is like actually a language that's very commonly used and people have pretty high opinions of. What are my thoughts on Ruby? I will get to Ruby in a moment. I have thoughts on Ruby.
That's going to ask you about anyway when it comes to that.
But it's all good. I mean, at this point, they're like Python, JavaScript, Ruby, Java itself are like all used by a major tech company, and they're all, if you know one of them well enough, you'll get to the other one. My gripes with Python are the standard library is a mess, and they have like five, like sometimes multiple libraries to do the same thing, and they're not even consistent, and it drives me nuts because it makes it harder. Inconsistencies make it harder for me to switch languages. And to Corey's question, what about Ruby? Ruby is a really beautiful language, and is definitely, I can totally see why a lot of the boot camps are teaching that, if you all permit me, I'm going to go into a strange analogy for a moment, but I'll come back to this.
Do it.
So I often think about software, going in from the software as art. One way you can think about software is like, in terms of team, is like a number of musicians. So some languages are dedicated to like soloists, like the person playing like a solo jazz or guitar. Like some languages ride in that. Some are like, they're small garage band languages where like you're gonna make some songs, you're gonna make an album, and they work for that. And then some languages are built for like, you now have a gigantic symphony. Like think of, like Google hires like thousands of new grads every year. And you need to like make all these new grads make something reasonable sounding together. And so I think the scale of like how often are, yeah, I'll get to Tasha's question in a second. I think a lot of these languages have different trade-offs. So I think Ruby really thrives in sort of like the market of teams with smaller teams where people aren't really rewriting, reading each other's code that often. There's a, like, I think of a trade-off between readability and writability. So like for Asana, we actually don't optimize on making the code that easy to write, but make it very easy for it to read, because we have a code base, one app that lots of people interact with. And so having much more standardized, stricter patterns that make it easier to dive into a specific part of the code base is helpful for us, but it does slow down feature development. I think Ruby sort of takes the opposite approach, which is why a lot of consultancies and whatnot use it. So it's really kind of going back to this, what's the correct tool for the job? My personal gripe with Ruby is there's something called on method missing, which is this like magically allows new methods to exist. And that makes it very hard for me to figure out what's going on.
What do you think on Swift? What do you think about Swift?
Swift is really cool. I think Apple's doing with Swift is really fascinating. Swift UI is doing, I don't know how many of you are familiar with React and but I think what Swift is doing with Swift UI is basically encoding React into their type system at build time, which I find really like a fascinating approach. I don't know enough about it. I don't write iOS myself, but it does seem like a pretty cool language. And I would put Swift into like what I call the modern category of like Go, Rust, Swift, etc., where like they're taking in some of the best ideas of what people have learned from other languages.
Thank you, Mr. Phips.
These are all my just like random opinions as a other person. They do not take them, these thoughts on software languages as like fact or anything like that. They're just my own personal opinions, trying to share where I get frustrated with stuff too. All right, so chat. Yeah, and also to be clear, if you learn any of the what I like major 4 languages of Ruby, Python, JavaScript, or Java, you probably could take those skills are more applicable than you think, and you probably could go learn the other one of those 4 faster than you learned the first one. Cool. Lauren Collins, can I answer Tasha and Rosa first? Tasha, talk more about a list of extensive titles at Asana. Yeah, so Asana doesn't have titles at all, which is pretty weird. And so I kind of just put what I did at Asana on my LinkedIn resume. And a lot of this actually I didn't have on LinkedIn at all until I started doing speaking for conferences. And I was trying to give people just things on my LinkedIn they could ask me about. I also get asked, like, messaged a bunch of times for jobs. And I get really either generic or vague questions about Asana. And so I was just trying to give like more concrete things for people to ask me about. They're not real job titles. For Rosa, how do I prepare for the tech challenge for apprenticeships for the next one? Rosa, is this for the Asana specific tech challenge?
Hi, yes, it's for the apprenticeship that you recently had. I think that you were interviewing like a few months ago.
Yeah. So Asana has an interviewing guide. A lot of other companies, I think, do too. I can tell you I interview a lot. I did 2 phone interviews today for candidates. One, would people be interested if I went a little bit into like my theory of interviewing?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
For
All right.
sure.
So I'll go to that. So I think interviews and the way that we interview at tech companies is pretty much terrible. And I think it's terrible and everyone knows it's bad and but there really isn't a clearly better solution. So I was the kind of person in high school who thought standardized testing was a game. And technical interviews are a lot like this too. And the game here, there are two parts to a technical interview, and one part that I think is garbage and one part that I think is real. And so the garbage part is, I think a lot of people rely on, do you just know the colloquial terms and concepts for an interview? And that's the part that I think it makes it really hard to break into tech, because unless you had a formal CS education, you're going to be missing a lot of these colloquial terms. One of the things I think of a sign of a good interviewer is if you're like, I'm not familiar, can you explain the concept? And they explain the concept to you. And so that way you're now coming from the same bar of, can you solve this novel technical question, and not, do you just know this term? Because the know this term thing is silly. Like, if you had Google, you would Google it. So let's just skip that part of the interview. And I think you should definitely feel empowered to ask the interviewer to have clarity, to provide clarity. Which now goes to my second part, is the information cat and mouse game between you and the interviewer. So a lot of the times the interviewer is relying on you to jump ahead and make assumptions that put you into a trap. You don't need to, and they're relying, oftentimes a bad interviewer is relying on the fact that you feel social pressure to answer and are just trying to fill a void. I like to ask clarifications. I even did this with Mia earlier. The first thing, she asked me a question, and the first thing I do is ask clarifying questions back. This gives two real major benefits. The first major benefit is you know that you're going to answer the question the interviewer actually wants you to answer, as opposed to the question that you thought they wanted you to answer. The second is it gives you a little bit of time to think about the question and to like come up with a response. So like, make sure you know the question you're answering, get clarity, slow things down, like get in your groove, take control of the pace, and make sure you're getting like the right answer in the right question. And that helps a lot. One of the ways you could see this, and I highly recommend practicing, is find a buddy and practice asking each other technical questions. Because I think you'll start seeing it from the interviewer where your mind races away. It's really hard as an interviewer to pay attention for an hour listening. And so a lot of like the communication of like checking in, asking for like feedback and social cues and like reading these things will actually help your interviewer stay engaged. And these are like really silly things, but they help a lot. Like, it isn't really a technical question. Like, a lot of these things are really just about pacing and like communication and clarity. I highly recommend you read the Asana interviewing guide. It tells you what we look for, which is we look for 6 things. We look for coding quality. So like what is the craft level of your code? Technical design, which is like how likely does your technical design account for edge cases and other complexity? Autonomy, how much can you drive the problem yourself and figure out the edge cases? Learning, which is when you do get feedback or advice, can you leverage it and get over the assumptions? So oftentimes interviewers are very happy to give you hints. And if an interviewer gives you a hint, that's a great signal that you should question your assumptions, because you probably have an assumption that's preventing you from seeing the problem. And so going back to like when you have a roadblock, it's usually that something you're holding something in your head is true that's probably not true. And so the hint is usually a hint about what assumptions you're holding you back. Finally, there is communication. How well can you communicate your mental model? And collaboration, which is just, are you pleasant to work with, I think is a reasonable thing to ask for. And that one is the biasiest most one, but we try to be really clear about we try to be really clear about what collaboration means too. And the interviewing guide goes pretty deeply into that. Hopefully that was helpful.
This is Lilia. Just from what I'm hearing, you seem to have gotten into tech without going to a boot camp. In today's world, does boot camp give you more of an edge versus self-learning, or each situation different unto itself?
So I think what you're saying is like, can you repeat the question? It was hard to hear you. I apologize.
Sure. You seem, from what I'm hearing, you seem to have broken into tech without going to a boot camp.
Correct.
And these days there are boot camps all over the place. Does boot camp give you that edge over everything else as far as being attractive to an employer?
Honestly, no. We paused hiring from boot camps for a while. We're now doing it again, but it's hard. I think the boot camps oversell what they can teach you, and I find it I struggle with boot camps because I think in some senses, like, it's really important to give people the career mobility to move between roles and positions, and that's hugely important. At the same sense, like, I always worry about them selling snake oil, because I think if you go back to that sort of like years of craftsperson, like, the boot camp is the thing that starts your journey. And so the people I've seen most successful from boot camps were the people who were aware that they were on the start of a very long journey and were very clear that they like knew that, were willing and excited to learn, and often brought a different skill to the table, either a different perspective or extremely like great communication or collaboration skills. Like, we hired someone who through the boot camp, from a boot camp through the apprenticeship program, who had a whole other career and has this incredible skill of just saying where she is stuck, summarizing it in a Asana task, because that's how we communicate, and then asking for help for that specific thing and communicating proactively. And it meant that, like, a lot of times when we hire new grads, we have to teach them how to be like professionals or workplace. We have to do all that stuff. And that's totally fine. Like, that's what you'd expect from any college student. But it was super refreshing to have someone who was like, okay, you know what it's like to be a professional in the workplace. You know how to ask for help. You know how to communicate effectively. And now, as someone who knows that code, all I have to do is like focus on like, can I just give you that piece of technical help? And so I think if you view boot camp as like the start of a journey, you're much better off than thinking that like you're a fully baked engineer at the end of it.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
So I've got to ask, with the way you framed a lot of your answers, it definitely comes off or makes it seem as if you've run into a lot of individuals who've, have thought they were kind of the end all be all of coding, as in, they were the ish and they weren't really. Like, is that an occurrence that happens fairly often within like, tech/coding?
Yes.
I thought since it's always evolving and growing, no matter how great you are, you still just gonna have to keep learning consistently, period, forever.
That's true. So as I said, these are all my opinions. I don't think these are necessarily true, so take them all with a grain of salt. But I like to think of the incentives. And so let's go back to the code for dogma stage, where you like have a set of tools or languages that you just hold. There's a lot of incentive to actually coerce people into using your technology or your language such that you don't need to learn a new one. And so I think that a lot of these flame wars that happen about technology are really about fear of learning something new. Mm-hmm. That's my hypothesis. And going to Lilia's point earlier, it takes a lot of vulnerability and like confidence or like willingness to put yourself out there to like learn something new and like struggle and like get over that roadblock. That's hard. And it can be really hard, especially if you've been doing a career for 10 years and like having to be like, okay, I know nothing about mobile iOS or Android programming. I probably should go learn how to do that at some point. I personally like writing mobile web apps because I don't have to. I also don't want to pay Apple and Google $100 for a side project because I'm cheap. But like, there is this incentive. I think a lot of these a lot of the know-it-all, tell-it-all kind of things, I think, come from base emotions of either arrogance and pride or like fear. And I think the fear is pretty reasonable. And the best advice I have is knowing that you can get over it and like knowing that the fear is there for everyone and like being just willing to accept that and like be like, yes, this is part of learning something new, but I will get past this point and there are better days ahead. And I think that's been one of the things that's like accelerated my career. Like, I've had to learn a lot. I don't write code for my job anymore. And so a lot of my job learning has been like learning a whole bunch of other skills that I never thought I would have to know. and like being really bad at it at a very high publicly visible level of the company. And I'm getting better at it. Everyone working from home via coronavirus is not helping. And that's a whole other thing. I really rely on being able to like walk by and talk to people in the office. I don't know how to do that right now. I'm bad at my job right now, and I'll get better.
Being able to accept where you're at and look for. Gotcha.
In your Phips,
Yeah.
in your opinion, someone trying to get into the field, being brand new to it, what, in your opinion, makes a good potential candidate, a candidate that is going to do well? What do you look for? What have you seen that makes a successful candidate? What characteristics? What personality traits?
Just like the humility and willingness to learn combined with the confidence that you can. Like that's pretty much in my mind, like the thing I'm always like, whenever I see a candidate who's just excited about this, who like wants to learn and it knows that they need to and is going to do just like, it's so much more, I'm sorry, I am playing with the thing there. It's just so much like easier to like be excited about hiring that individual. Like that's really the main thing for like any new grad or any person coming at boot camp is like, are you going to want to learn?
That part was not that part doesn't scare me as far as continuous learning. I have been in that mode for the past couple of years because I learned early that everyone has to continue to learn. That's just the life that we're in, and so I think I have that part down pat. I'm not afraid to learn, especially if I'm taking on something new. I just want to know that I'm able to do it,
Totally. And that's definitely hard.
Mm-hmm.
Did I miss any questions in the chat, by the way?
I just had a question.
Sure. What's up, Lauren?
I currently want to learn, and Corey Taylor said you missed hers too.
I apologize, Corey. We'll get to you next.
I'm trying to learn data science, but I'm not sure if there's like any specific thing that I should be learning or going over and reviewing. And if there's any way like you can help me out with that, because I want to help myself and I also want to help my squad with like the stuff you were talking about, like, going to the interview process or the job process. So I just want to help myself and then help my squad out with that because they're further along than I am.
Yeah, so I don't know as much about data science, but I have a friend who's a data scientist, and I thought for a while I wanted to learn data science, so I asked him. I think Python is the the actual language of most data scientists at this point.
Okay.
Kaggle is a data science community, and a lot of challenges on there. So he recommended I check out Kaggle and try to do some of the data science challenges on Kaggle, Kaggle. And the other one I've heard really rave reviews from the Google machine learning course apparently is excellent. I have not taken it, but it's free and apparently it's really good.
Okay.
Yeah.
And as far as like helping my squad in the community, like how could I help them as far as like doing the interview process for like what you were talking about, getting them set up for like stuff like what you're doing?
Sure. So there's a bunch of GitHub repositories and everything and for interview questions.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think you can find like common tech interview questions and find a list and just practice asking each other them.
Okay. I appreciate it.
Yeah. And then we had Corey. Corey, what was your question?
Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. Corey?
So it looks like she was working on a stack and wondering.
Okay, I see it.
Quick question, since you didn't ask that question. You said the Google what course? The Google Cloud training course?
Google machine learning is really good, apparently. But Google offers a bunch of free programming courses that are pretty solid. In terms of the MERN stack is pretty common. I don't know if you really, like MongoDB, I'm always surprised that people are still using, but it is. Same with Redux. I think Redux is kind of falling out of favor in a lot of places. they're good to learn. If I would focus on one thing, it would be React more than all the other ones. And then I would probably put them in this order: React, Node, and then maybe a tie between MongoDB and Express. You can learn Redux from a lot of the stuff that's already in React. Cool.
Hey, Phips, I got a quick question for you.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you've been at Asana, it's been over 6 years now. So regarding that, I'm curious if you've seen that as advantageous to move your career forward or detrimental to the progression of your career. Because personally, I've had to move every couple of years in order to feel like I was moving forward in my career at all. So I'm curious, what has made you stay, or what considerations have you taken behind that decision?
Yeah, I've been pretty lucky to ride a wave with a good manager and a couple other good good breaks of having increasing scope and impact. And so I've definitely thought about leaving several times. I think right now it would just take me a lot of where I am in the company is a combination of both my technical skill, but there's also the relationships I have with other people in the company and the trust that I've built. And so I think that there's some aspect of that, like it'd be hard for me to work up to the same level of scope and impact at another company because I'd have to rebuild all that trust and relationships. Not saying it's impossible. I think it will happen eventually. And also, I guess to go back to my own question, I think I'm scared. I have a pretty good life going on right now. I mean, like I was supposed to get married this year. We'll see if that actually happens, but like I'm hoping. But like there's a bunch of these things. Like my life is pretty good, and so I'm kind of having this balance of like, do I want to give up the goodness for this extra challenge? And I don't know. Like that goes back to that kind of fear thing I was talking about too. Like sometimes it is, and I justify that I think I'm doing a lot of good work at Asana, and I'm trying to have a big impact with the things we do at Asana, but it's definitely a question I ask myself every day.
Is there a point? Do I have time?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that everyone else got to ask any questions too. Did anyone else have any other questions they didn't get to ask?
I have actually 2 questions, but
sure.
Please go ahead.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for your time, and
of course,
I really appreciate it. I'm actually starting it as a beginner, and I'm doing self-study, and I actually sign up for a college course because I think one of my friends actually recommended me to build up my fundamentals, while working within different other institutions. And I'm not coming from a technical background, so I was going to ask you, what is your suggestion to me to work on? And my second question is that, let's say this coronavirus situation continues for, let's say, 1 or 2 years. What negative impact is going to make on this industry to software engineers in general?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think the second question is a super valuable question. I don't have an answer that I feel confident sharing because I don't know what's going to happen. So I'm going to be frank. I think I think your friend's correct in that having some college classes are helpful, like an intro to algorithms and data structures class can be genuinely useful. There are about like 5 or 6 core data structures that you'll see everywhere, and they're pretty helpful. So like basically, like I'll type them in the chat. Like you have your O1 hash data structures like linked lists and hash maps, your O log n, which is like heaps, trees. ON is like your arrays, sets. ON log n is sorting. And basically, if you're getting asked technical questions about algorithmic complexity, most of your things will fall into one of those 4 buckets. And if you're doing ON squared, like By the way, this is my other tip. If you're being asked a question that has like an algorithmic complexity focus to this, throw out the n squared solution, like the 2 for loop answer that you can answer, like even if it's bad, like throw the like the naive solution onto the board, because at least you have a solution on the board, and then try to optimize from there. Because you also get that psychological safety of being like, I already answered this question, like I have something, even if it's absurd, that works. So now like we're gonna just make my like crazy idea better. And that's like whatever you can do to get on the interview and get your like the comfort and like the pacing on your side, like you can control the ball, like the better off you'll be. Ageism and in the tech in the workplace. I don't know. I fortunately am not at the age of where that's applying to me, though the new college grads make references that I don't understand. So it does make me feel older than I want to feel. I do think I've heard it's very much an issue, and I think some of the issue, my hypothesis for why this is true is some people don't want to learn new things, and that's tough. And so like, especially if the skills that people have aren't relevant, it's hard to justify hiring them. I also think that some people take advantage of the fact that young people are kind of gullible, and there's a preference for that. Because if you think about some of the, I don't know how true this will be with more modern businesses, but like a lot of the startups from like the 2014 through 2016 era just like didn't make sense as businesses. And like it didn't take a lot of logic or effort to be like, that doesn't make sense. Like you could just think about their business model, like, how will this ever work? And so like, I think that there's some aspect too of like a lot of businesses that, in my opinion, seemed kind of shady from the sense of like, I just didn't know how they're going to work. And I think that if you're more experienced in life, you might be willing to call that out sooner, and people don't love that you being called out on that. But that's my like really sort of hot take, and I don't think that's entirely true, and I don't know enough about ageism to really give a real answer. Devin just asked, what's your best advice for on landing an interview with a limited experience as a bootcamp thing? My best advice is reaching out to eng managers at the company. And my younger brother is actually, this is a topic near and dear to my heart, because my younger brother is 26, and he's just about to graduate college. He's had a lot of medical stuff go on, and he's trying to find a job. And he's actually graduating with a CS degree, and he's finding it really, really hard because he has this really basically paper thin, no resume. He doesn't have, a lot of you I think are transitioning careers, so at least you have a career reference you can go on. He has none. And the thing that I've been finding that's been pretty helpful is finding engineering managers. And the way that I've been finding them to try to help my brother is by going to GitHub for finding the company on GitHub, finding the people who contributed to the repositories on GitHub, and then looking them up on LinkedIn. And more often than not, a lot of them are like eng managers now. And so if you do this, you can be like, hi, I saw your code on this repository. I was really interested in blank. And I think it's a lot easier to ask, like, Twitter is also a pretty good thing. Twitter is also a great suggestion. One of the things I like about the GitHub approach is it gives you a natural question. And it gives them a question of like, why is your company good? It's like, hey, can you tell me about like why you made this technical choice in this thing? And like, if you have a genuine, interesting question about like how they designed this library, it shows that you did the research to like look and understand how this library worked in the first place. You have like questions about how it worked, and like you can show that you're learning, self-initiative. There's a bunch of things that can do that. I don't know if this actually works, but if someone like emailed me, I get a bunch of random LinkedIn questions about like, what is Asana like? And I don't really know how to answer those. They're like pretty generic and vague. And like, I feel really bad, but like, I just have no idea. Like, it's a company. We do things. Check our blog. But like, when people ask me about my like work that I've done in the open source or things specific in some, it's just so much easier for me to have a conversation. Like, it makes the barrier for me responding less. And that onus shouldn't be on you as the person seeking a job, but it definitely matters. Like, I find myself like a good question about something that's specific, like, helps just me answer or respond to people so much better. From Corey, when should I actually jump into JavaScript algorithms and data structures? I guess I'm trying to figure out, is that more software engineering or data analyze? That's a software engineering thing, not a data science thing. I mean, I'm sure data science does need to learn other stuff like that, but a lot of those software engineering questions are very much tend to be, sorry, those algorithmic complexity things and data structures tend to be for software engineering. Cool. Does anyone have, I don't have to run at 6, so I'm happy. I know other people do the time for the calendar, but if people have other questions, I'm happy to keep answering them.
I actually do have to run, but I wanted to let everybody know that I'm dropping a link in the chat for all of the notes I took for this first hour. And I just wanted to thank you again for all of your answers. There's actually a couple of quick quotes that I got in there.
Oh, God.
Yeah, I'm that person. I type way too fast. My favorite one, though, is actually the first line of the second page, and it says, notice where you're naturally spending your time on a project you want to see done.
That one I can stand by. Some of them
yeah, I didn't do any direct quotes of anything that you said was an opinion or something that you didn't want people to go by as like you didn't want them to read it as rote. So anything that was opinion based, I paraphrased so that it couldn't be a direct quote for you.
I super appreciate that.
Anything that you were like very vehement about or stood behind, I made sure to either quote it or at least try and write it. There is a ass load of typos, so I pre-apologize for that. The other quote that I was going to point out for you when you were talking about someone brand new to the field, I actually don't know what page this is on because I've lost where I'm at, but it says the humility and willingness to learn combined with the confidence to know that they can.
Yeah,
so
that's huge. Yeah, I totally believe in that 100%.
Those were the two big ones that I pulled out. And I put that in there too for you if you wanted to take those quotes and like throw them on your profile, because you know those quotable moments are really good for, you know, if you do decide to branch out and decide to, you know, jump down that rabbit hole of a new job, those are quotable events that you can have that kind of just show who you are, and I thought were really good moments for you. So I hope you enjoy that. I hope everybody else finds yeah, you guys are welcome. Stop. I'm not looking at chat anymore. I refuse. But I hope everybody finds use in that. But I do have to run because I've got about 3 million things that I'm doing, and I'm also sick, so I'm trying to get them done so I can go to bed. So have a great night, and thank you again for your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Have a great night. Sleep well.
Appreciate you, Mia. Thank you for that. Great. Does anyone have any more questions before I close this out?
Yeah, I just had not really a question, but kind of just a little statement about I think somebody put something about ageism, and I hope you can hear me okay.
Yeah.
I mean, personally, I think that, you know, it doesn't matter technically how old you are, you know, if you're willing to learn something new, then, you know, you just go for it. That's my personal opinion about it, because I was wondering about that myself. Now I'm in my mid 40s, but I don't see that as a roadblock. I mean, it's time for a career change. You know, I've been loving computers and technology since I was little. So, I mean, if anybody worry about, you know, ageism, I just say, you know, just go for it. I mean, the only thing, you know, somebody can say is no, and then you go to the next one.
Yeah, I totally agree. I don't know enough about ageism to give a real answer, but I hope for my own sake that that's true, because I want to keep doing it. One thing I will notice that I think has been pretty interesting as someone who's been in a company for a really long time is how much better engineers became when they became parents. And I think it was just like this sort of like, I don't know if it's just being a parent or like the like wisdom that came along with it of like being forced to prioritize and know what you can and can't do. But like, that was really interesting. And so I think going back to the whole thing, like I think everyone has a lot of unique and interesting things to bring, and like your context, whatever life stuff is, I think if you're able to leverage that well and have the confidence to learn, there's a lot of opportunity to contribute. Vanessa, I'm sorry your question got buried. Where is it?
It also might be helpful if you guys can unmute yourselves and we can just build off of that right there.
Hey, Melvin.
Yeah.
She said, she put it in the chat, something about being a beginner.
Yeah, okay, I see it. I'm a beginner coming from a pastry background, and I learn best with visuals and muscle memory. Are there any programs or websites you'd recommend for someone like me, even just advice? So far, I've found HTML and CSS course provided the Kenzie community to make the best. Yeah, so I've heard some of these free code camp, Codecademy, Execute Program. There's a bunch of these things out there, but I think if you're visuals, like, I'm actually really can I ask you a question about your pastry background?
Oh, yes.
Okay, so how do you think about artistically styling pastries?
Could you be a little more specific?
Sure. So that's the kind of generic question that I think as someone, I don't know very much about pastries, but okay, let's say that you are going to make a bespoke cupcake. Like,
Okay.
how do you think about how do you think about the layering of the cupcake? How do you think about like when you're going to put things on? Like let's say I like wanted to make a Pikachu cupcake. Like, how would you think about building a Pikachu cupcake?
So a lot of, you have to come up with sort of a basic flavor profile first. And then you have to think about what you want it to look like in the end. Is it a cupcake that just has like Pikachu's face, in which case it would be a flat surface, or is it more 3D, in which case you would have to either buy or create little Pikachus to go on top. And then the next part is it going to be a realistic design? Can you carry it from one place to the other? You have to consider temperature, humidity. Do you have the tools to transport it from one place to another? Will it survive? That sort of thing.
Cool. So it sounds like there's a couple core metrics under there of like color, flavor profile, like whether or not it's 3D, how far can it, like what temperature can it survive, how it's going to be transported.
Yeah.
This kind of thing. Yeah. So I think a lot of those skills that you're already describing are a lot of the ways that people think about designing HTML and CSS already. It's just instead of temperature or whatever, it's like a different, just like different set of fundamentals. Like, does it fit into the box model? But like, I don't know if you know about design systems, but if you liked a lot of that thinking, you might really be interested in design systems.
Okay, cool. I was looking at software engineering for right now, but I have not taken a good look at design, so that might be better suited for me.
I'm not even saying that. Design systems are actually how you get software engineers to write good looking websites. And so they're actually about like the set of tools, like, okay, so when you write a website, you can have all the CSS you want and random buttons everywhere, but should you? Like, is that good design? Probably not, unless you're going for something really Picasso-esque. But design systems are about how do you enable developers to make beautiful apps and experiences faster and better, and have a lot of that sort of like layering and thinking, like, how do you structure people so they make the right, you give them the set of constrained but empowering choices to make something good. And I think given what you're talking about, like, you could, by looking at a few design systems that could help. Also, there's this book that I bought that's incredible. It's by the people who wrote Tailwind CSS called Refactor and UI. And it was mind-blowing to me. It was like a great way, if you're an engineer, to learn how to do design. And the reason why I liked it a lot is because it gave me like the framework and tools to think about it. Like, I was like, okay, I should use a 4-pixel subgrid and like these other things, like those things you learn from experience of like, okay, you need to have the right flavor profile. You need to make these core decisions. Like, it gave me the roadmap for what those decisions were. And that's really helpful for learning something, is like to know what the dimensions are. Another time that I've thought about this too is like, I had a time where I like ended up living by myself and I was trying to buy a couch and get silverware. And I discovered that like a lot of these things just had like underlying variables. Like silverware apparently has this like rating, and under a certain rating, it just blows up in your dishwasher. So I was like, what is the cheapest silverware over this rating? And couches, apparently, like I like try to learn as much about couches as I could. And it turned out to be use wood, use screws. And that was pretty much like real pillows. And I was like, there was something very comforting about that, but like, I wouldn't necessarily have known about that. And so like finding whatever the underlying metrics are for something can be like really enlightening, or underlying like levers.
The book that you mentioned, Phips, can a layperson understand it, or do you have to be at engineer level to understand that?
I think any person can understand it. It was a great book. It's expensive, but the author, Adam Waltham, posts a lot of really good tips and tricks online. And all of Tailwind, the CSS framework, is based on it.
Peter, I'm gonna say one last thing before I go.
Sure.
I posted a lot of links or a lot of notes in the chat for you to give to your brother or use yourself, and they were about a bunch of jobs that a friend of mine had told me about.
Thank you so
and
much.
that hiring. And if you have a second to look through it real quick and write them down, that way you guys can look over them and see if they're still hiring.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
No problem. God bless. He works for the insurance company, so.
Fair enough. Yeah, I think my brother would be pretty much happy with literally anything.
Yeah, well, the insurance company's always hiring, but I don't know if he'd want to do that or not.
That's fair. I don't know either. He is a
But
thorny.
yeah, those were all hiring, and you can find those on LinkedIn, and also you can find them on Indeed. But like I said, I just posted them in the chat.
Cool. Any other questions that people have? Happy. I am literally locked into my apartment. I cannot go outside. So I figured I'd give it, but I'm also happy to let people go. Up to you all.
Yeah, in the same boat. Yeah, like Phips said, if anyone has any questions right now would be the time to do so. And if not, I'll go ahead and close this off.
Hey, Phips, can you hear me? Oh.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, y'all can go. Y'all can go.
Go ahead, Nate.
Okay. Well, I was going to ask, as far as starting off and being a coder and whatnot, what would be the best programs or businesses to affiliate with or get started with that most people really don't mention or know about?
I don't think there's like a one secret program. I do think that there are certain parts of the industry that are like a little bit less common. I think hiring people who want to do application security or product security is a little bit harder. Mobile development tends to be a little bit harder to hire for. So there are areas of the job market that are harder to hire for. And so that might be helpful. I do think, though, the best way to learn how to code or do anything is build something you want. If you don't want it, the thing you're building, you're not going to end up building it. Like, I have started, even like I don't know how to write software. It doesn't take me that long. And I have started I have graveyards of side projects that I have not finished because I just didn't care about the end result. I was like, oh, that's a cool idea. And have you all seen the graph of projects, where you have initially this excitement, then this slump of actually working on it and the joy of finishing it. And if you don't want if you don't want the thing at the end, you're not going to get through the slump of in the middle.
Okay. Thank you, man. I appreciate that. That's all I really need to know.
Yeah, no problem.
Phips, can you give a brief description of machine learning? I hear the term all the time, but I'm not really clear on what that area is all about.
Sure. So what it's about, and I will give you the my non-snarky answer. What it's really about is taking a set of data and building up building up a model that takes in the data and produces an outcome. So it's a great way to take a bunch of numbers and then produce a guess. So we have bad versions of it. Yeah. The worst version I can think of how people are using machine learning is credit scores. So in real life, your credit score is the sum of a bunch of numbers and tells you something like, are you trustworthy? And I don't think it actually does that, but that's what supposedly does. Machine learning does a lot of the same stuff, which is basically gives you a guess or a heuristic. And so it's really useful for assigning a score or a weight or figuring out is something in this category? So for handwriting is this set of pixels the category, in the category of something that makes an A? Or a lot of times where I see it used too is there's a company called SIF Science, which is based on the actions that this user is doing, are they are they likely to be a hacker or someone who trying to do credit card fraud? And so a lot of them are basically given a bunch of data, assigning a score or a value to it, and then being able to, based on evidence you see in the wild, update the model that generates those scores or values.
Okay.
that's a super high level bad explanation of machine learning. And I am not an expert, and I would definitely recommend that. But like, it tends to be really useful for taking data and classifying or scoring things.
Is that the gateway to AI?
Yeah, so oftentimes when people say AI, they really mean this. Now, there are very, very fancy models on top of that, but a lot of times AI is really taking large data sets, running a model over them to see if it can, this model can replicate this tagging of it. So this is called supervised learning. And then applying that supervised that model in the wild. And if you're really fancy at the Google level, you can run ML to train ML, but a lot of it runs on this concept. The Google machine learning course, as I said, is apparently excellent. All these questions are making me realize I should maybe get over my own fear and uncomfortableness and go just take that class.
Thank you.
Great. So is that the questions all the questions that we have for tonight?
I had one more.
Sure.
When it comes to like, I know with machine learning, I'm interested in data science, but I want to focus on doing software engineering first. Would you recommend SQL along with Python, and then later on like machine learning or AI learning?
Yeah, that sounds like a great start. I mean, a lot of things people, I think this is a quote, not a quote, but like a common thought, which is that like the set of companies with actual big data is pretty rare. A lot of companies have small data in SQL databases. And so like a lot of data science is clean. For my friend, he ran a data science consultancy before creating a data science startup. And he said that most of his work was actually just like cleaning people's small databases and like making sure that people understood the data. And so Python and SQL seem like a great way to do that. But once again, this is outside my area of expertise.
No problem. I'm just asking because I know you have had a wider range of experience and actually had a chance to be around other people who've probably been in data science, plus were just like, you've probably seen some of what they've had to clean up or what they've actually done, really.
I have not, but I've just heard stories. I have friends and I just listen.
Then I'll ask this, what is, I'm not even gonna say what's a useless language, but because my teacher, funny enough that earlier you mentioned how people like have been coding, someone's been coding for 40 plus years. Well, my teacher currently in Linux, actually, he worked for John Deere, but and he worked for that back when he worked with COBOL.
Yeah, COBOL still, I think, powers our banking and airline industries.
Yeah, and he was telling me, he's like, hey, if you do anything, I'd recommend COBOL. If you like learn the other ones, good, but learn COBOL because that's an industry people kind of have like forgot that it's actually still existing.
Yeah, I think that's true. I don't think I think the companies that have COBOL would like the COBOL to disappear. But that's my guess. I don't know if that's true. I think the hard part would be hiring. If I was one of those companies, I'd be scared to be able to hire engineers for COBOL.
Yeah. Because I was actually looking it up, and sorry if I'm taking your extra time. I was looking up actually COBOL jobs just around in my area. Actually, I found a few. I was surprised, like off the bat. Just saying people hiring for COBOL engineers, and then also just people just COBOL just with no other languages that they recommended.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely a language that people are stuck with, and if it's definitely an esoteric language that people will be looking in demand for.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Sorry for just like not trying to give you a question.
All right. So I think that wraps it up.
Thank you all.
So yeah, Phips, thank you. Like we've covered so many super valuable things on this call tonight, including like being genuinely interested in what you're learning or building, right? Like cultivating a growth mindset, placing an importance in learning new things, finding effective mental models and analogies that work for you, building trust and relationships and going above and beyond. I'll ask one last question to close out, but before I do so, where can people find you?
Yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me at Twitter at PSPeter3, and you can find me at GitHub at PSPeter3. That's usually my US username pretty much anywhere. And
Sweet.
so most social networks that you can find me. I'm pretty active on Twitter, but yeah, feel free to reach out. What's your last question?
Great. So we do have this whole, we have introduced this whole, I guess, town hall. It's kind of like a Reddit or a Quora, some sort of discussion board thread. We call it discussions within the app. And typically I'd like to ask our guests to give essentially the people that are on this call tonight a set of actions that they can take and post about within discussions. So what would be the one thing people on this call can do this week to move them closer to their goal of breaking into tech?
I think it would be, it does not even write code, but posting the idea of a program or software or anything else that you want to exist in the world, just personally. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. It could be something really simple, but and actually the simpler and smaller it is, the better, because it's more likely that you might be inspired to do it. But what kind of things do you really, really, really want? I personally like playing board games with my friends and wish there was just a really small board game table that I can make in JavaScript. And I might go do that. I was teaching myself peer-to-peer networking this morning to try to do that. Whatever small thing that you want that you wish existed in software would work. And posting that, I think, is a great way to set a goal for yourself.
Yeah, I think that's actually really, really great place to start. A lot of these incredible tech companies really come from, people scratching their own itch. And that kind of gets them through the whole, the rigorous process of if you guys haven't heard of Angela Duckworth's book, Grit, she talks a lot about how, staying the course and pushing through those really painfully boring parts to in the process of seeking mastery is going to be huge. And a lot of people tend to, be dissuaded by that, or they stop and they give up because it gets boring. It's no longer exciting. But when you have something so compelling that you really just want to have exist in the world, like Phips mentioned, it can pull you through some of those tough times. And cultivating the muscle memory of, writing those things out loud or writing them down and sharing them with people. Not only do you have to, take your ideas and kind of structure it and see it in kind of a digital format, it makes it a little bit more real for you. But also you might find other people that, resonate with the same vision that you have. And in Career Karma, right, a lot of you are kind of in the same process where you're either beginning to learn how to code, or you're going through coding boot camps, or you're teaching yourselves, right? Finding other like-minded individuals that have, a very compelling vision that is very similar to yours, or very aligned to what you want to bring into the world. You can find your next co-founder right here on this call. So I think that's a really great way to start. And Phips, I wanted to thank you one more time for spending an hour and a half with us tonight and sharing a lot about your experiences. So yeah. Thank you so much, Phips.
Yeah, thank you all for asking great questions and listening. As I said, all of my opinions are my own, so hopefully you find they're helpful, but I don't think there's one true fact. So thank you all for listening, and I'll best of luck.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate it. All right, everyone. If you haven't already, please be sure to check out the discussions within the app. There's a ton of you that are on this call right now that can take action today. So go ahead and think of your ideas, post them. I'd love to see them. I'll definitely share them with Phips. If we get a ton of them coming in, that'd be really awesome to see. And if anyone here is interested in joining a beta tester program where we showcase and kind of hint at a little bit more features that are coming down the pipeline, we have a lot of really awesome stuff happening. Shoot me a message and I'll be sure to add you to that group. So thank you all again for joining us tonight, and have a good night. Let's break in.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Good night, everyone.
Night.